Please welcome Jim O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. I think this is only my third one, so Richard, you're one ahead of me. And it is a great pleasure to be here this morning. I've entitled this The Road Less Travelled, and The Road Less Travelled is Robert Frost's eponymous poem about the choices we make, or more to the point, the choices we don't make. I chose it because, ironically, our roads are probably the most travelled. 66% of all freight, 4 million journeys a day, connecting every significant node in the country, major cities, centres of industry and homes. Everything from airports to car factories to power stations. So how come it took until 2015 to put in place a long-term plan for this £120 billion asset? Why did it take until then to worry about the long-term security of the supply chain, to consider the impact of the digital future, and most importantly of all, to set a vision where this network should be far into the future and start working towards it? Where we are today isn't perfect, but it's a whole lot better than where we were. We've maintained our long-term improvements in safety, seeing fewer people hurt or seriously injured on our roads. We've reduced contractor injuries by 50% and traffic officer injuries by a factor of 3. And we've transformed our approach to customer services. We no longer treat people like teenagers, telling them to take care while towing or to go and have their eyes tested. We've added likely journey times to our motorway message signs and introduced safely higher speed limits on our major roadworks, significantly reducing journey times for all of our users. And finally, the very reason we were set up, delivery. We're about 70% of the way through this RIS, our first 5-year control period, with 22 schemes completed and 18 in construction. We have the £1.4 billion A14 scheme running to time and to budget, proving that this country can build major infrastructure on time and to budget. I visited this site again last week, and you can now travel the entire 22 miles of this new road end to end. There's one vantage point where you can stand, and to your right you can see a bridge that we're building over the East Coast Main Line, entirely to Network Rail's specification and standards. And if you look to your left, you can see a kilometre-long steel ladder beam bridge over the River Ouse and its floodplain. And you can stand and look at these two. And if you cast your eye to the horizon, you can see the cranes at the far end integrating this into Huntingdon. It is a truly remarkable scheme, and if any of you get the opportunity to go and visit, you should. I'm very proud of it. Both the Stonehenge Tunnel and the Lower Thames Crossing are in specification and design stages and have committed funding. They still have committed funding and planned delivery dates. They are mega schemes, talked about for years, and now they are actually getting delivered. So, the road less travelled is not our road network, but the shift from annual funding to 5-year regulatory style settlements. It's probably whatless to dwell on why it took so long to get here, so I won't. But the achievements I have described have undoubtedly come from that shift to this road previously less travelled. Actually, on reflection, long-term funding could be described as the road never travelled. So what next? Well, the next 5-year capital programme continues to tackle the worst parts of our network and support the government's agenda of secure jobs, more housing and a thriving economy. Of course, we must continue down the road of long-term funding, and the Chancellor's £25.3 billion for RIS2 between 2020 and 25 is in the budget, and government will be carrying out its comprehensive spending review at some point next year. So, roads are a long-term business, and we must have settled on what we are building for RIS2, and just as importantly, we must decide the shape of RIS3 between 25 and 2030, and deliver its development during RIS2. The tragic accident in Genoa and our experiences in RIS1 in particular, many of you will know the Albury Viaduct, where the condition of it became so serious that we have had to close an entire carriageway in order to carry out the remediation of that motorway. At Spaghetti Junction, we were quicker. We got there earlier and we did it with lane closures. But by the time we got to Albury, the entire carriageway had to be closed to remediate that structure. We cannot allow that to happen again. So, one of the innovations for RIS2 is a long-term capital maintenance fund that addresses major structures going forward, and we will be developing a long-term list of what next, what in 5 years, what in 10 years, what is the expected life of the things we own, and when do we need to repair them. We've transformed our approach to air quality in recent months. We have a section of smart motorway on the M1 where we are imposing temporary speed limits to both smooth traffic flow and reduce traffic volumes. Yesterday we introduced a sign which told our road users that these speed limits were for air quality purposes, and we are going to be varying those speed limits in coming months to see how it affects the volume of traffic and real-world emission levels, so that we can better understand the impact of the strategic road network on air quality in our towns and cities. We now have a year's data to inform our modelling, and in the coming months we will be studying that and feeding back to both DEFRA and the DFT on what we found. We also have 101 short sections of our road known as links, which the DEFRA modelling infers might be out of compliance. We've analysed 30, and so far they're all within compliance, but we're working through the rest of them to assess the potential harm they might be causing and how we can address that. One of our air quality problems, and one of our major challenges, is that local roads are seen as a viable alternative to our road network. And indeed, we do use them reluctantly for diversions when needed. This means any deterrent we use to reduce the impact of air quality from our roads, either by speed limits or lower volumes of traffic or clean air vehicles, might just move traffic onto local roads or other parts of the road network. This would of itself be illegal. You can't just shift the problem around. The things that you do have to genuinely attack it. And what causes me the greatest worry is that Highways England would be moving vehicles from our safest roads to less safe alternatives. So we have to address the SRN's air quality issues without transferring the problem to other roads. Next year, we will launch our digital roads conversation. It's not obvious, but nonetheless true, that our smart motorways will form the basis of the country's digital transport spine. The cabling we've put in for smart motorways, our changes to our control room IT, and the way we operate it will prepare our network for the advent of connected or autonomous vehicles. Most of the press talks about the autonomous aspect. For Highways England, the most important piece is the connected piece. We will be providing the data. Whether you use it to make a better decision or whether the vehicle uses it to make a better decision is of less value. The most important thing is that that vehicle, with its occupants, are making the best use of our network. So, two-way communication with in-car devices will offer almost limitless information to the car and its driver, and we will have more to say on digital roads in the first 6 months of next year. A more unseen part of our digitisation agenda is the digitisation of our construction. Already, the days of white pegs to lay out groundworks and banksmen to guide machines are behind us. Our supply chain now uses GPS to move millions of cubic meters of earth to within centimetres of where it needs to be. This all relies on the 3D models being used by our designers. We are about to deliver our first computer-designed smart motorway. We've fed the rules, the problems to design it into it, and it spits out the design. Where it can't solve the problem, it asks for human help. So we've moved from computer-aided design to computer-led design. In construction itself, our intention is to use that computer design to prefabricate as much as we can away from site and to deliver it pre-assembled. We already do this for bridge sections. The next obvious candidate is smart motorway refuge areas. It will reduce costs, improve safety, and reduce time on site. something that's good for road users and the safety of our workforce. Over the last 3.5 years, perhaps our quietest and most understated achievement has been to take responsibility for our asset. In a number of our regions, we've insourced the asset management. A great deal of the knowledge about them, their condition and their performance was resident in our contractors, and our main involvement was making sure they got paid. This is all changing, with Highways England taking responsibility for what gets done and making sure it's value for money. Even in those areas where we have not yet implemented asset delivery, we're encouraging our contractors to work with us in this way, and we're increasing our focus on things that matter to our customers, such as litter and vegetation. So on this road to stable long-term funding and planning, what are the next set of challenges? Well, firstly, it's not just important that RIS2 is deliverable for its own sake. It must also act as a stepping stone into RIS3. We need a balanced work programme, one that is a good mix of renewals, regional improvements to the existing network, and flagship schemes that have transformational impact. There's only so much work that we can do on the network at any one point in time, and we've now reached a level where the interplays on the network should be sequenced over many years. I would remind you that at one point in RIS1, we rescheduled part of the work programme to avoid the A47 having 7 sets of roadworks on it at the same time. If you were driving along that road, you would have just come to roadwork after roadwork after roadwork. By contrast, I reluctantly agreed to the scheduling of 3 smart motorway schemes on the M6, I'm sure many of you have driven them, overlapping at the same time. In network terms, this was not desirable, but it was necessary to provide the road capacity to support the regional economy. However, we recognise the difficulty that's caused our customers. We recognise it's a frustrating experience for our road users, and we must in future continue to reconcile the needs of current road users with the future needs of the network. We also need to provide stability for our supply chain. We've made some progress with this in RIS1, and we're introducing new procurement mechanisms in RIS2, routes to market as announced today, most noticeably for the regional delivery of schemes, but also for our smart motorway programme. It's vital that the volume of work remains consistent, both in the mix of project sizes that we have, but also in the regional spread. We can only build on the government's skill and regional development agenda if we can provide visibility of long-term swim lanes of consistent work, both in the nature of the work, but in its regional distribution. Our regional delivery programme, as you know, is moving away from individual project bids, largely because contractors tell us the bidding process is expensive and everything is focused on cost rather than the outcomes for road users and communities. In our new regional frameworks, we will award projects based on performance. Was the job done on time? How was the safety? What was the quality like? How did our neighbours and users feel about the experience? Of course the budget matters, but so do these other things. And most importantly at all, what have we learned from this project, and why will the next one be done better? Finally, we need appropriate development funding for RIS3. Anything that is to be built between 2025 and 2030 needs development and planning funding now. A typical DCO road scheme takes 8 years from the time we decide to do it. 2018 plus 8 is already 2026. It is year 1 of RIS3. And of course, if future ministers and governments are to have choices, then we actually need to develop more schemes than we intend to immediately build. They will in the end all get built, but for the government to have choices, the development hopper needs to be full. So, the route down this road less travelled is not well described, partly because we've not been here before. Nonetheless, it is a road that has been and continues to be worth travelling down. It's already rewarding us with an SRN that is correcting a backlog of congestion and poorly served routes. It is creating a key enabler for our digital future and opportunities for homes and jobs across the country. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. While you settle down, I'll ask you a couple of quick questions, as you're the boss. So you've nice problems to have, but you've had to grow very quickly. I think I read you'd taken on 1,000 staff this year. I mean, like I say, nice problems to have, but how steep has that learning curve been, and how much have you had to change your thinking over quite a short period of time?
I think that the learning curve has been remarkably steep, and I take great comfort from people 3 years ago, 4 years ago. The question would have been, how do we do this? How do we achieve it? Today we have two things. One is people come up and say, well, the last time we did this, and how we can do it now is better. So it is fantastic to see the organisation gelling together and gelling with the supply chain, and developing that culture and that shared history that we can draw on to do things in the future.
I mean, how difficult is it to get the balance right? And we heard this a lot last year, and we hear it all the time, between building what we need now and adapting to this future that no one quite knows what it's going to be, what vehicles are going to be driving around, what infrastructure you need to connect up the vehicles, what the roads are going to need to look like. How difficult is it to get that balance right?
I think it's probably one of our biggest challenges. Meeting the needs of road users now and solving future problems, and how do you get that balance? That's a huge challenge, because nobody likes roadworks, and if you're only going to be using the road for the next 2 years, you don't care what it looks like in 10 years' time. So that's a major challenge. In terms of the digital architecture, there's a certain amount we can do which is future-proof. The cables we're laying on the smart motorways have huge capacity, so that's fantastic. The new architecture we're putting into our control rooms is very flexible. And then we experiment to see what these technologies might mean. So down in Kent, we're playing with Wi-Fi, we're playing with telephone signals, we're playing with cars that have some of this connected stuff in it. We're working with the various catapults across the country to see how these vehicles interact, so that we have a rough idea of what the most likely outcomes are. And as they firm up, we can firm up our plans.
Really important for you to save money. You've got to make some savings, keep in control of those costs. We see what happens with railway projects, for example. Yeah. Do you feel you're across that now, how you're actually going to make these savings?
I think we are, yeah. I mean, we're not perfect. I think if you compare any organisation to the perfect, you're batting on a losing wicket. So I prefer to look back at Highways Agency and say, where are we now? And I'm pleased with the distance we've come and the improvements we've made. But of course, costs remain a continued focus. And everybody, from the most junior admin person in Highways England through to the Secretary of State, needs to understand you can't have everything you want.
Jim, thank you very much.